The channel has spoken at length about the different issues that have been affecting this region of the world. The southern part of the Western Hemisphere, it's largely ignored by most of the mainstream media, unless, of course, they are attempting to denigrate a group of people. Most Americans only think about this area when they're planning vacations. But an article came out today regarding Mr. Maduro, the newly re-elected president of Venezuela, that I think will give some insight, and to a truly fair-minded person, I think it'll cause you to take a step back from the mainstream media and their narrative and their dialogue about what's going on down there, and look at it differently. You see, in 2016, we elected a new president, and it's no secret that I'm not a giant fan of the guy, but I think we can take something from the platform that he ran on to illustrate a point. He wanted to, and still does want to, build a wall on our southern border because of the influx of undesirables from certain areas of South Central Latin America. When you think of these countries right off the top of your head, the first place, of course, was Mexico. Then he talks about MS-13 from won't even show up here, it's so small, El Salvador. Classically, though, when you think of drugs and violence, of course, Colombia comes into play. Even farther south, the stories coming out of Brazil are nothing short of terrifying, with children, tiny children, that wander around streets in these cities and work basically as little tiny preschool gangs and will steal just to survive. Thousands of children live on the streets in Brazil and in Rio, places like this. You don't hear, though, very much. It's not really in the consciousness. Nobody hears about Bolivia, Ecuador. Very recently we've heard, of course, about Venezuela, but classically we've never heard about any Venezuelan drug gangs or any major violence in Venezuela other than with the food shortages. Prior to 2014, most people would have probably scratched their head about where Venezuela was down here. The article that I speak of is... let me find it here. Here. Now, the title of this article really doesn't reflect what the man actually said. Here it says, Maduro accepted that his government is not doing things right. That was not what he said. Here's what he actually said. The first thing I call for is a transformation of the leadership of the revolution. We aren't doing enough, and the things we are doing, we're not doing well. There are good things that we're doing, but that doesn't mean that we can't do them better, or we're not doing enough. What he's saying is this, is that he's calling on the folks that have supported him around his country to double down and to redouble their efforts towards making things better for the Venezuelan people. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. The man just won an election, and he won it by a large margin. And the first thing he did was come out and say, we can do better. We can do much better than we are doing, and I call on those who support me to do that. There's articles out here, another article out here too, that tries to paint Mr. Maduro in a light that says, well, he's not really legitimate because of the small margin by which, the small portion of voters. And it says here Maduro got 6.1 million votes, representing 30% of the census. Well, if you take the amount of votes Mr. Maduro got, 6.1, and you divide it by the population of his country, 31 million. Let's see if we can do that real quick. and see what we get. $6.1. Okay. Divided by 31 million people. Okay. 19% of the total population voted for him. Now, let's look at our election. The current president got 62 million voters to vote for him. We have a population of about 325 million in this country. About the same. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is this. When you talk about Mr. Maduro, and you hear people talk about him like he's some kind of a evil, terrible, horrible socialist type, he has the same percentage of support that Mr. Trump does in his country. Why should the U.S. have anything to do with it from this point forward? When you look at this area of the world, and you think of violence, and you think of corruption, and you think of all of the negative aspects that come out of these cultures, the countries down here that are what you would call socialist aren't the driving forces behind it. In 2016, Peru passed Colombia in exporting cocaine for 1 year. It's not that these countries are perfect. Ecuador, Venezuela, Bolivia, Cuba. It's that they want to be the drivers of their own destiny. And the last thing I'll leave this video with is this. After he got elected, he came out and he gave a speech and talked about 6 lines of action that he wanted his administration to focus on. And here are those 6 lines of action. Dialogue and pacification. That he wanted people to start talking to each other and start working together and let Venezuelans work with Venezuelans for the betterment of that country. 2, moving toward productive economic agreement. This is basically him promoting the idea that communes and local economies and local governments should take the lead in fixing their local areas. Renewing the fight against corruption. The authorities will continue the fight against corruption, bureaucracy, minimalism, with the aim of promoting a new patriotic, social, and civic ethic in population. Remember when I said that there's no IRS down here? See, people pay taxes down here because it's a patriotic, ethical thing to do, to support one's neighbors with one's taxes. Protection of the people, with the mechanism of what they call the Coordinata Patria. The head of state guarantee that the achievements in security and social protection will be strengthened and expanded. What this is a card that they have issued to people that they know to be Venezuelans, Venezuelan citizens. And they can transfer benefits onto this card that can't really be transferred to the Colombian agitators, the paramilitaries. It's for citizens only. Defense of the nation against foreign attack, and I've shown the videos where they were handing out weapons to the disabled, the elderly, to women and children to defend their country. And the last thing I'll leave with is this, number 6. And everybody's like, oh, terrible socialism. Remember, socialism down here isn't what you think of it is up here. To reinvigorate the fundamental principles and foundations of South American socialism focused on the human being, the right to independence, freedom, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national self-determination. That's what socialism is down here. Not a bunch of people sitting around waiting for their government check. It's people that don't want giant globalist outside forces to direct where their country goes. It's just that simple. And this is what's trying to be done. And I can't imagine any elected official in this country at any level, after having won an election, coming out and saying, we can do better, or we should do better, or we need to fix this, or we need to fix that, about that person's own party and that person's own group. In our country, it's just usually meetings of the Mutual Admiration Society, talking about how great they all are. I've never heard any one of our politicians be introspective on either side, left or right, and say, you know, the Democrat Party needs to do a better job of this, or the Republican Party needs to do a better job of that. You don't hear that. But you see, this guy used to be a bus driver. And he used to have a job. And he understands how life works for the normal person. He's not some wealthy elitist autocrat. So, before you go make judgments, maybe understand what the truth is. Like, share, subscribe.